Failing an exam can be devastating, but failing an exam that is the first part of many more exams can make you doubt the path ahead of you. I know that in our society, people would rather share only their wins than losses, and I also considered not sharing too. But I have come to understand that failure is a part of the learning process, and I think it's important to share our failure too, because at one point or the other, we fail, and our immediate reaction is to feel less or doubt our abilities. I had heard that some people write this exam 6 times before passing, and I always thought that when I would write it, my case would be different. It had been 2 years since I last wrote an exam, but based on my academic history, I was confident in my abilities. I registered for the IELTS exam exactly 1 month to the exam date. Yesterday, I registered for IELTS exam. I've been wanting to write it for so long, since even before my house job, but I always felt like it's better I study first, and when I feel like I understand it enough, I have studied enough, then I register for the exam. And because of that mentality, I just, never wrote it. Then I started house job. Then I felt like I didn't want to write it. But now I'm like, you know what? Let's just get it done. So yesterday, impromptu, my friend was like, let's register for this exam. Like right now, let's register for it. And I was like, I was scared. But I was like, okay, register for it. That will give me more motivation to actually study for it. So I'm going to be doing a lot of studying for these exams. If you guys want, I had studied a little bit for this exam almost 2 years prior, but you never really start studying until you make financial commitments. I had a month to prepare, which I thought was more than enough. I used resources from one particular website and practiced as much as I could. It's an English exam, how difficult can it be, right? Nigeria is a multi-ethnic, multilingual country blessed with over 700 ethnic groups with different languages. However, English is my first language, and I considered myself a very good user of the English language. So I thought no matter how little I prepared, I would pass. I gathered all the tips I could from the website, and on the exam day, I set out to write. I was very nervous, not because of the exams, but because I had to travel the next day, and I wasn't looking forward to it. The IELTS exam was relatively a 4-hour exam divided into 4 parts. The speaking part was done first over a video call with an examiner somewhere in the UK, and later in the day, the listening, reading, and writing were done together as computer-based tests. Writing is said to be the most difficult and challenging part of this exam, famed for always holding people just below the pass band. Nevertheless, at the end of my exam, I was very confident in what I had written, but had a lot of doubt about my reading section, and I really thought that would be the section to fail me. One of the prerequisites to migrate as a doctor is passing the IELTS exam, but not without some conditions. The first requirement is that you must have a band score of 7 in each part of the exam. You would expect the total band score to be 7, right? Well, no. Which brings me to the second requirement. You must have a total band score of 7.5. Which means you must get at least an additional 2 band in any part or across all parts cumulatively. Anything lower than 7 in any segment means you did not meet the requirement, ultimately failing the exam. The next day I traveled, and surprisingly 2 days after the exam, I got an email that the result was out. It was not a surprise to me that I got a 9 in speaking, with 9 being the highest score. I also got a 9 in listening. The reading section that I was most scared of, I got a 7.5, and in the writing, I got a 6.5. My initial thought was, what went wrong? I used the website that was recommended to me and I applied everything that I learned. So how did I get a 6.5 in writing? My overall score was 8, but because I had a band score lower than 7 in writing, I failed. When my sister saw the results, she said, "You did so well," but I had to explain that as a doctor, our passing requirement was higher, and so my result is not good enough. For so long I thought to myself, what went wrong? If I applied everything I learnt, what else did I miss? My friend tried to encourage me to write it again, but I said I don't know what I would do differently. If I have learnt everything there is to know on the writing, I will definitely write exactly the same way I did. And so, I was doubtful about writing it again. About 2 weeks later, my friend told me there was an available seat to retake the IELTS exam in 3 days and asked if I could study for it in just 3 days. Although I was not prepared, I said yes, and then he went ahead to book it for me. For the next 3 days, I used a totally different material to study. I watched YouTube videos of one particular tutor, and as I watched these videos, I totally understood why I failed the first time. The material I used to study for the first exam was insufficient, and now I was actually learning how to write according to the IELTS standard and according to the marking criteria. I got another website with resources to do some more writing practice. Although this is a 4-part exam, I only studied for the writing part. I woke up that fateful morning feeling ready and prepared for the exam. However, considering I studied and prepared for only writing, I felt I needed to sharpen my ears for the listening part of the exam. I did a practice for the listening section and I scored 5. My score made me laugh and I told my friend the score and he suggested I do another practice. But I said that's not necessary. That's all the practice I need to do. Unfortunately, my exam venue was changed. I had a different venue for speaking and a different venue for the computer-based test, with just 30 minutes in between. During the speaking section of the exam, my computer crashed twice. An exam that was supposed to be 20 minutes took almost 2 hours, as I had to wait for availability of examiners before retaking the exam. The computer-based test was supposed to start by 1 p.m., but at 1 p.m. I was still waiting for my speaking section to be sorted and waiting for availability of another examiner to conduct the test. After then, the computer froze again and my test was cancelled. They changed my computer room and I restarted the exam for the 3rd time. By this time, I was very worried because I was already told that they would start the CBT without me. I was able to complete my speaking, but I was no longer at my best, and my examiner asked questions about a topic I was not too familiar with. Moreover, I was mentally exhausted. Immediately after, I had to rush to the other examination venue to start my computer-based test, and luckily I noticed that they waited for me to come. The writing part of the exam had 2 parts, and 20 minutes into the first part of the exam, I was still at my introduction. Yet, I was supposed to spend about 20 minutes on the first part of the exam. When I finished writing my introduction, I paused and I put my hand on my head and I just said to myself, God, please, you have to help me. I can't write this exam again. After the exams, I had so much doubt about what I had written. I was scared if I met all the writing criteria, if I corrected all my errors, and if I used the right grammar. I studied more for this exam, but I was more scared after writing it compared to my first attempt. The results for this exam came out 5 days later, and I got an overall band score of 8, just like the first exam. But my scores in each segment were different. I scored a 9 in listening and 8 in reading, which, although was higher than the first exam, I expected a 9 because the reading was easier this time. With no surprise, I got a 7.5 in speaking this time, but I was happy to have passed. In the writing section, I got a band score of 7.5. This is a very good score. There was a significant improvement compared to my first exam, and I was so happy. Failing this exam has, in a great way, prepared me for the bigger exams ahead of me. It reminded me not to solely trust on study resources recommended to me without trying out other options too. That it is important for me to do my research by myself. I also learned that for most international exams, there are study guidelines and criteria to be met, and it's important to follow it. Finally, it reminded me that regardless of my previous successes, if I don't work smart enough, I will fail. Sometimes, just like me, you may not be adequately prepared for something, and you may fail. But remember, failing is part of the process. Never give up. Failing is just a learning experience.